All right, now we're live. So today I have as my guest Kylee Rackam, who is a self-aware narcissist and a borderline in remission, and we're going to talk about that part too. But thanks for joining me today, Kylee. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here.
I'm very glad you hopped on here because I got a lot of good questions for you. And I think the first thing we should talk about is how did you initially get diagnosed as a narcissist?
So let me close the window. It's noisy. I got diagnosed with BPD, borderline personality disorder, back in
Oh,
2020. So that was my first diagnosis. And I thought that was all I had for a very long time. I was very impulsive, erratic, mood swings, everything that accompanied BPD. And then a few years down the road, I was in therapy for years trying to figure things out. I was healing some of my BPD symptoms, but my psych noticed that I had some characteristics and traits of NPD. And so she started evaluating me without telling me because she didn't want that to change the way I acted around her. And I brought it up to her one day because the common rhetoric I see is if you wonder if you're a narcissist, that means you're not one. I wondered for years if I was one. And I brought it up to her. I was like, do I have NPD? And she was actually like, yeah, I've been evaluating you and I want to go over the criteria. And then she diagnosed me shortly after. And that
oh,
was last year, January.
okay, that's wild. And so your initial diagnosis was borderline.
Yes, and because I've been in therapy for that for so long, it's now clinically in remission. My symptoms are managed and essentially dormant.
Okay. And what were the symptoms of the borderline that first brought you to treatment?
I was out of control, honestly, with the self-destructiveness, the impulsivity, the erraticness, the clinging on to relationships, just trying
Ooh.
to find external validation wherever I could. And mixed with the MPD, that probably just made a concoction of just pure impulsivity. But yeah, I had no impulse control. Anything I thought of, I just did.
Okay. And they say now anyone who has one cluster B personality disorder, 60% of the time they can have another one too. And I
Hmm.
think that's important for people to know as well. But
Yeah, I mean, it's all in the same family, so behaviors overlap, they bleed. Yeah.
absolutely. And so for you, the push pull, was that the big thing with borderline that really, and the fantasizing about love or wanting the ideal love?
For me, it was not necessarily about love because I still to this day don't really even know what love is or what it feels like or what it's supposed to feel like. But for me, it was more about control and wanting the other person to be admired by me or feel like they loved me and cared about me. Not in the sense where I wanted romantic love, but I just wanted them to show that I was worthy. And that's where it came from. The push and pull was of control and power imbalances and wanting that upper hand versus, oh, I need you. I want you to love me because I want to feel loved. It was I want to be admired.
Oh, that makes sense. I mean, I can identify with that too, for sure. And
Mhm.
would you consider that a fearful, avoidant attachment style?
Yeah,
Or,
I
okay,
would.
all right. And was there other kinds of impulsivity with maybe with like drugs or alcohol or gambling, things like that?
Binge eating, other disordered eating behaviors, and self harm are always my go to vices. I never really was big into substances. I gambled with drinking a little bit there and on and off, but overall, it was eating disorder and self harm.
Okay. And how was the anxiety and depression? Did you get a lot of anxiety and depression with it too?
Oh, yeah. And I still struggle with that constantly. That's still something that I very heavily identify with.
Okay. And that's, I think, a big thing with the borderlines. They get both in particular, right? They'll get anxiety and depression. I think narcissists, they'll get depression, not as much anxiety, I don't think. It kind of conflicts with the grandiose sense of self a lot of times.
The vulnerable narcissists or the coverts, they tend to actually lean into the anxious and depressive state. So it depends on the subtype and where you lean on the pathological scale. But yeah.
Okay. And so you being self-aware narcissist and borderline in remission, what has really helped you in your journey?
Well, the first step was acknowledgement. And I don't want to shift the blame onto anyone else, but my final breaking point was an abusive relationship with someone who had diagnosed NPD. And I still only had BPD at the time. And I just felt like they call it a narcissistic collapse, where essentially your ego goes in on itself because it's like rock bottom but amplified. And I finally realized how I was treating others because that person treated me the same way I treated other people for years. But
Oh.
And it was a huge wake-up call, and I needed that. And it was like karma, but in a good way, because I finally was able to be like, wait, I actually do these things to people, and it's not fair and it's not okay. And so I went to therapy, and just over time just started realizing that acknowledgement is the first step, and self-awareness is also one of the first steps. But if you only stay in that one spot, you're not going to get anywhere. You can be self-aware without actually doing anything about it to change things. So there's a huge difference between being a self-aware borderline or a self-aware narcissist versus actually doing the things to make changes to your life that are sustainable. So doing the work of therapy, learning the coping skills, trying out different types of therapies. So I did a whole lot. Meditation, self-help books, different types of therapies, group therapies. I tried everything.
Okay. And so I know there's a lot of self-aware borderlines now. What was the single most effective thing for you? Was it DBT or was it something else?
DBT helped, but it also still felt a lot like homework. For me, the biggest thing was shadow work. So like identifying the subconscious triggers and unraveling a lot of the parts that were shame-based or rooted in those deep-seated beliefs that I had to uncover, and just giving myself the grace and compassion to actually feel my emotions, because I still struggle with that. I always just shoved everything down and repressed it, and I had to actually learn, hey, to heal, you actually have to feel discomfort, and that's something I'm still struggling with, but trying to navigate.
Okay. I mean, and it's good that you're able to admit all of this as well, because especially with the narcissist, they're usually not as able to, and then they get kind of pushed off the way. And what do you think, besides the disorder itself, why do you think it's so difficult for them to, like, they see people like you now, and there's more of them. There are more self-aware narcissists now. And I think that would help. It would help them to say, okay, they're doing it. They're able to do it, but maybe they perceive it as criticism, perhaps. But what do you think?
I think there's some societal factors that play into it. BPD tends to be romanticized on some corners of the internet, whereas NPD is completely demonized wherever you look. When I first got my NPD diagnosis, I Googled like tips for healing narcissism, and I never got any actual self-help things for me. I got how to escape the narcissist or red flags of a narcissist, basically everything to just get away from a narcissist. And that was really isolating. And because it's thrown around in everybody's vernacular nowadays, it's just became a buzzword that's entrenched with so much negative connotations to where you don't even want to identify or look within at your own traits. And a lot of people have narcissistic traits and they don't want to actually acknowledge them because of how demonized the word actually is. And there's different subtypes. It's a scale. There's different severities of it. It's not this pathological all the time, like malicious, vindictive one that everyone associates it with. There's different like groups and types, and I wish it became less of a like bad word so people could actually acknowledge it. But also with the disorder comes a lot of black and white thinking, absolutes, all or nothing. And because the ego is so fragile, it has so many protective defense mechanisms, so that you really have to break through those in order to be like, actually I do these things and they're wrong. And that also it comes with a lot of cognitive distortion, so believing you're right, or believing that other people are the issue, or believing the world is the issue. And if you're raised that way, and when you go into adulthood, you carry that with you, and you have to unlearn how to disentangle that. And that can take a lot of work.
Sure. And I think I can see both sides of it, right? Where it will be difficult, because I try on this channel not to fall off into victim porn stuff, which is what some people do, right?
Mhm.
And the way I would consider that is when they're staying entrenched in, nope, I'm the victim, and this is just the big bad narcissist or big bad abuser over here.
Yep.
I try to make the distinction between, okay, let's talk about some behaviors. But at the end of the day, also, I don't think the label matters as much. It matters for the person who has the disorder. But I think for the other people, it doesn't matter as much for them. Because,
Yes.
okay, so say it's like, and there's some sneaky ones out there too, right? So it's an ADHD with rejection sensitivity dysphoria. It's like, well, that could look pretty close to a narcissist a lot of times, I bet.
Yep.
But does it matter? Does it matter for the person on the receiving end?
No. I mean, I get messages every day being like, oh, is this person a narcissist? Should I stay? They treat me badly. It doesn't matter, again, like you said, the label. It matters how they treat you, how they make you feel, if you feel heard, if you feel seen, or if they make you feel like your mental well-being is being detrimented, because that's ultimately what matters. Even in therapy, I rarely get brought up the diagnostic label. It's more so, okay, what are the behaviors that you need to work on? How should we tackle them, improve them? It's not, okay, how to be less of a narcissist. It's how to lessen the symptoms that are currently impacting your daily life.
I
So
get you.
yeah.
And so, and for the treatment of narcissism, CBT or working towards maybe behavior modification, what has been most helpful for you in that regard?
Again, I think shadow work has been really helpful with that. Psychodynamic has been helpful, somatic. I've tried a lot of different types of therapies, but CBT actually really was helpful for me once I actually wanted to go to therapy, because I've been in therapy on and off since I was 12 years old, and I was doing CBT then, and it didn't help because I didn't care. I didn't want to go to therapy. I was like forced by my parents, and I was like, I don't want to be here. But when you actually put the effort in, yeah, therapy can be really, really helpful.
Absolutely. And I think, like for me, we talked about this before we went live. Like I had
Mhm.
all sorts of issues, and so I was so uncomfortable that I was desperate to find something that was gonna like fix me or what's wrong with me, so I can try to figure out what's going on. And I
Yeah.
think something that everyone could be helped by is writing on, say, the 12 steps. And you don't have to be into like a higher power for that or anything, but you just get some awareness and
Yeah.
you're asked things like, oh, what are your defects? What are your shortcomings? What are your patterns? And
Mhm.
just even sitting down to figure that out to me is so powerful.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that helps is having a support system of people that are going to be cool with you being honest, right?
Yes.
And that's huge, where people are not going to jump down your throat and be
Mhm.
like, you're just a bad person because you did this. It's like, no, that people that can be on your side with it, that is so calming and is able to, like, you're able to be you and improve by being you too.
And I will say it's hard to identify behaviors when you're surrounded in an environment that's toxic or enabling. Sometimes you don't
Sure.
even know it's enabling until you leave it. But yeah, that's something I also became aware of as I was healing. When you can't heal in the environment that broke you is a common quote. But yeah.
Now, do you get a lot of people that think, oh, you're talking about behaviors that are just like me? Like you're talking about behaviors that sound like behaviors I'm doing. So people that are narcissistic or maybe borderline, do they reach out to you and say, hey, you're talking like me? Like you see, your thoughts are me.
It's funny when I post a BPD video, I'll get comments like that, like, "Oh, that sounds like me. Do I do this?" If I post an MPD video, I'll be like, I'll get comments like, "Oh, my ex did this, my boss did this," and it's like, okay, it just depends on what diagnostic label I use in the video, I guess. But yeah,
I
it's
get you.
interesting and polarizing. But
I occasionally get people that come out to me and say, you know what, from what you're talking about, it sounds like I'm doing some of those things.
Mhm.
And it's not even the people that are just being called that by their narcissistic partner.
Yeah,
Like that happens too, of course. But people who really do
yeah,
have the stuff, like, oh yeah, I think I do what you just said. So I think, especially on the lower end of the spectrum, I think
mhm,
that's absolutely possible where people can do that. And I want to reassure those kinds of people because I don't want them to be, like you said, triggered and run off to say, oh
mhm.
no, they're just demonizing narcissists. And I know you, and I guess your partner, you don't like the terms narcissistic abuse, right?
I'm more neutral on it. My partner doesn't
Okay.
like it, but yeah,
Okay.
I don't want to invalidate anyone's experience. That's my opinion.
Okay. I mean, all right. So I agree with you then on that part because I understand what people like your partner would say. But
Mhm,
I think the use of it is it describes a group of behaviors a lot of people have experience with. And so the
mhm.
people who are trying to figure out what's going on,
Yeah.
okay, it's a useful term. It's
Mhm.
not a perfect term. And in fact, it might not even be valid in all of the cases, right?
Yep.
But there are people that, because of their sensitivity to criticism, because of their feelings of superiority or the love bombing to value discard cycle kind of thing, they will do some of that stuff. Because
Mhm.
I hear the pushback is this. It's that, well, there's no abusive behaviors that are distinctive to narcissism, is what they say. And I was like, I get what they're saying with that. But at the same point, like you said, and I agree with you with what you just said, is that if you go into that distinction too much, it can be kind of invalidating for the people that were on the other end of it. So that's why I think, although it's not a perfect term, I think it does still help. But
Mhm.
I don't want people to get caught up on that. Like, oh, this is the evil narcissist, screw a narcissist Fridays, or all these things I see people do. I've never been a fan of that.
Mhm.
And I've actually helped some people that are probably on the narcissistic scale. I'm probably not as good as some sort of professional doing it. Like Dr. Mark Ettinson or somebody like that, but they've come to me. And since I have some narcissistic traits and borderline traits, I've always gotten along with those kinds of people better because we like kind of identify with one another. And I don't really emphasize that part as much, but I probably could. I could probably say, you know what? Oh yeah, I feel this sensitivity to criticism. I feel like the need for like, oh, I like some of the attention I get when I post things. Yeah, it just is what it is. I'll be lying if I said I didn't. So I could, and maybe I would get more of those kinds of people coming to me if I did more of that.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And it's good that you have the introspection to look within and acknowledge those traits within yourself without feeling sort of shame or trying to push it away. Just acknowledge it. Acknowledging it is good.
Right. And that's what NA and AA, I think, did for me most, is it got me in that routine of just being honest. Because it's one thing to be honest, but to be honest with yourself too.
Yes.
That's the superpower, to become humble and say, okay, like, yeah, I'm not perfect. And yeah, I mess up. And yeah, it's super uncomfortable to mess up sometimes. But I got into the habit of like getting comfortable with that uncomfortability and being okay with it because I wasn't demonized by my circle. Like, oh yeah, we relate to what you're saying. And that goes a far way too. But I guess in the people that you see that talk about narcissism, what are the things that you see that are problematic or the things that you don't like?
Well, on the internet, I see a lot of the narc abuse coaches that will correlate or equate any negative trait to narcissism, like all narcissists are cheaters, or all liars, they're all manipulators, and they do X, Y, and Z. Like, I have never cheated in my life. I have been around infidelity, and I have been cheated on, and they weren't by narcissists. And it's just not. Absolute statements can be very harmful because people will watch those videos and then be like, oh, I dated a narcissist, when in reality they could have just dated someone who was cheating and had commitment issues or was an avoidant attachment. And it's just, that's what gets the money rolling in though. And I've noticed that a lot of narc abuse coaches, they gain a huge following off saying any negative trait is associated with narcissism, when in reality it's not, but that's what gets people tuning in.
Right.
They want to find answers for how their abuse affected them.
And I think I try to refrain from always and nevers. I think people would say, oh, a narcissist will never apologize, or a narcissist will always cheat. And it's like, it's just not always true. It's like there's always going to be some room for some gray. And I just don't, in the mental health world, psychology world, I don't like the black and whites because it rarely is the black and white. You can say often, perhaps, like often they may cheat, often they lie, but it's like, it's not going to be always in anything. But people get upset. People will get upset when you don't say always. People yell at me in the comments, you didn't say always. You said often. And I was like,
yeah, I get absolute comments all the time. Like, oh, a narcissist wouldn't make these videos because they always weaponize therapy, or they always think nothing's wrong with them, or they go the opposite direction and no narcissist will ever change because they can't change. And it's just like a lot of black or white mentalities, when it's kind of ironic considering personality disorders, they have black and white mentalities, but
absolutely, absolutely. And I guess that's another good point. How many narcissists do you see improve in the people that you speak to or whatever?
How many narcissists do I see? I mean, I'm not gonna like armchair diagnose anyone.
No. Like how many improve their behavior? People that you know that are that.
So I follow a few NPD creators, Nameless Narcissist, Delta, Batwolf, and they've all improved in their own ways, and they seem to be trying to take a strong therapeutic approach. And I think, like with my partner, he doesn't have NPD, but he has ASPD with narcissistic traits, and he's improved a lot based off what he's told me, and he's in therapy, and I've definitely seen improvement since meeting him. And I think as long as you want to improve and want to make an active change and you put the work in, anyone can do it. It just sometimes takes a long time to get there, if at all.
Now, in that relationship, I don't know how much you want to talk about that, but is there lots of fireworks and ups and downs, or are you guys?
No.
No.
He's been in therapy for over a decade. He's a mental health professional, so he's very trained in conflict resolution. And when our arguments do arise, I'm the one to withdraw and shut down, and so is he. So we'll take space, and I'll not isolate, but I'll take some space for a few hours, and then we come back, and we don't want to enable or judge each other, but we also want to make sure we hold each other accountable. So we'll try to find solutions after every argument, because we don't want to sweep anything under the rug. We want to actually make efforts to change whatever happened, and so we talk about it. And having the tough conversations can be hard. It can be difficult. It's not fun to actually like talk about things with your partner and actually have to hear them, listen to them, and be like, oh, I was wrong. Okay, what do we do to fix this? But that's how healthy relationships operate.
Sure. And how do you get through that discomfort for you? Because do you have, I guess, a severe sensitivity to criticism?
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you push through that when you're talking to him about this kind of stuff?
So for me, mine does not come out in the form of like lashing out or defensiveness. Mine will come in the form of internalized guilt and shame and like pity me. And I have to talk it through. And sometimes he'll call me out and be like, no, we're not doing that. We're not going to victimize ourselves here. We're going to just talk it out and try to come up with a solution. And then I have to reel myself back in and be like, you know what, he's right. And have to actually listen and take it in and absorb it and realize, hey, I was in the wrong here. Or actually, no, he wasn't all wrong. And just listen.
And that's the big thing that you just said there, you being able to admit, oh, he's right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that you see, narcissist or not, that a lot of people just don't do in this day and age. They're not able to admit that. And when they can't admit that, then there is no more improvement. They stagnate. So what would you say to someone who's in that position that really has a hard time with that they just can't get that humility and admit they're wrong?
Arguments are not made to be a winner or a loser. They're supposed to help get you to find a solution, because you ultimately care about the person, and therefore you're never going to be right all the time. You want to actually hear what the person has to say, and there's no even right or wrong. It's more so you're hearing their side. You want to tell them your side, and then you guys come to a solution and work it out that way. But trying to look within and trying to understand where they're coming from and why they may feel hurt and why their feelings are affected in that way. It's healthy to actually be able to acknowledge that and be like, okay, so you're feeling this way, and I understand that, and I want to improve with these ways here. It can be difficult to actually acknowledge it. It took me a long time, but yeah.
I mean, I think a big thing is just having someone you're compatible with, so that when you're safe, when you feel safe with the person,
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to feel like a battle. It's not going to feel like they're trying to win and be antagonizing. To me, that's the hardest part in a lot of the relationships. And even when you're just talking to somebody, some people, they really want to win. They're really trying to get you. And it's just really difficult in that situation.
Yes. And cluster B disorders, they tend to attract other cluster B disorders, and it tends to be like a spiral if both of them are not in therapy. And it's hard to find healthy conflict resolution if one of them is just dead set and always trying to be right. And you can't really win with that, or win. You can't really work with that. So
I get you. And that is the hardest thing. You see that online in particular, because I don't know what your comment section's like too much, but you probably get some of that sometimes where people are just like at you. They're at like they're examining every word you say, and they're trying to get you in a mistake or get you in something you said wrong.
Yep. A lot of psychoanalyzing, a lot of people saying that my eyes are dead and they can see the evil behind my eyes, and like the smirk that I made on like the 30-second mark. And it's a lot of just people reading into things that ultimately it's their perception. And I try not to be too harsh to them, because a lot of them are just hurting in their own ways, and they're trying to find ways to project their own pain onto me, because I'm a blank slate. I'm a person on the internet that they don't know. So it's easy for them to be mad and take out their anger on me because they don't know me. And I try to be compassionate towards that. Like, I was abused. I don't want to add to their pain. So, yeah.
I think a lot of people, they use the creators as a punching bag.
Yes.
And so they had a stressful day. Oh, let's take it out on Kylee. And they'll use you as a punching bag, like it's the boxing bag there. And as if they do it verbally.
Yeah, I get a lot of death threats per day. Yeah. But
over what? Just over your diagnosis?
Yeah, just videos talking about me being in therapy. They'll say that all narcissists should die, or that I should be in a body bag. And it's
I do see that sometimes. You're right.
Yeah.
Now, people do say that. People will say, oh, it's a demonic spirit or this, that, or the other. And I mean, I can understand why they'll say it when they're dealing with the people that are just hurting them and are not trying to improve. But to me, that only would apply to the people who are like not trying to improve. It's like the people who are trying to improve, I
Yeah.
mean, I give them a little more grace.
I think it triggers that part of them though, because it's like they were abused by someone who they thought was a narcissist, and if they see someone with MPD in therapy, it just triggers that, like, why did that person not heal or go to therapy? Why are
Sure.
they going to therapy? And it's so I kind of get some of the anger.
Right. And even when they do that, it's still a sign that they're not healed. They still got something going on, whether it's CPTSD or just healing a trauma bond. It's they wouldn't get that emotional reaction unless there was something still going on.
Yes.
So it's tough. But how do you deal with all the criticism that you would get? Because I'm sure it's painful.
Yeah, it definitely gets to me a lot. And as I said, I try not to lash out at them. I try to approach it with compassion, sympathy. I'll try to just keep the peace. I don't want to add to their pain. And that might make me come across as a pushover, but I don't like conflict anymore since being in therapy. So I just internalize it. And sometimes I internalize it too much. A lot of people say I'll get like supply off like the praise and the positive comments, but to be honest, those are like noise to me. Like, I appreciate them, it's sweet, but I don't get like my ego fueled. My ego gets fueled from the negative comments, because those are the ones that I believe confirm the things I feel inside.
Mhm.
Like, I feel like inferior on the inside, and so when I get hate comments, it's like, oh yeah, they were right the entire time, that's how I really am. And so I have to like emotionally regulate and self-soothe and try to calm myself down and bring myself back to, baseline.
And then maybe we can nerd out about this for a second, but do you think the borderlines, they're the ones in particular that really feel bad about themselves? It's less so common, I think, in the narcissist, but considering you're comorbid with it, I don't know which one's doing which, but what do you think?
I'd say that I have a more reined in reaction now that my BPD is in remission. I feel like vulnerable narcissism, I feel like they still have that inferiority complex because that's what they use to prop themselves up. It just kind of manifests differently. Like, they have the same narcissistic behaviors that are in the DSM-5 as the grandiose narcissist. It just, they
Right.
feel inferior, so they'll use inflated self-importance, grandiosity to mask that inferiority and their insecurities. So I don't know what disorder is doing what. I just know that, like, I'm having a dysregulated response, and I try to self-soothe and regulate that way.
Okay. And I guess have like medications or supplements, have they been a part of your story too at all?
I've tried a lot of them. A lot of them have not really worked for me. I'm a person who tends to get a lot of side effects, but I'm on Wellbutrin and clonazepam, and I want to get off medication eventually. I'm not really a huge med fan, but for now it works.
Okay. I
Therapy
mean,
has been the best form of treatment.
I take a lot of supplements myself, and I used to talk about them a lot. But to me, like they do click together parts of my brain. And maybe for me, it's because of being on the spectrum where they say that has to do with the GABA system. And then that's what clonazepam like focuses on too. It's something in the GABA. It's a GABA A agonist.
Mhm.
But the supplements, there was just something that felt missing with me. So that
Mhm.
when I took, and I take a lot of supplements, and I think they're all little bits and pieces of the puzzle where it does kind of put things together, but there is no like complete solution with it where, okay, I'm on these things, but I also probably feel a little bit less as opposed to being extremely sensitive, which I used to be, like very sensitive. And it gets in the way sometimes being so sensitive where you're just so sensitive to negative emotion that just everything's just super
Mhm.
painful. And it's tough. It's tough just to function normally a lot of times when you're that sensitive. So I kind of like tapered that off, but they do help. And I'm for whatever helps people, right? If
Mhm.
medicines help people, medicines help people. I don't like whatever works is what
Yeah.
I'm all for.
Yeah, I'm not anti-medicine in general. Just, I guess, more so just for me, I don't know. But I think that it's good that it helps take the edge off for you so that you can function like better, and yeah, whatever works,
Absolutely.
it's good.
Now, have you heard about the research people are talking about these days about narcissism and having a big genetic component versus simply from childhood trauma?
Yeah, I have read some studies on it, and I think that NPD is still very under researched, and there's still a lot of things they don't know, and they're still uncovering to this day. I think there is probably a genetic predisposition, but a lot of familial dysfunctional familial dynamics or childhood trauma, I think, does play a role in it. Not necessarily all the time. Like, you can have like the golden child narcissist or whatever, but I think that Especially with like vulnerable narcissism. There is usually a traumatic element in childhood or the formative years in play. But genetics with personality disorders in general, that's not really a well-studied area, even with BPD or like ASPD or HPD. It's just, they don't really know. They're still kind of studying it. It's possible.
I mean, I would agree with that. I think, and it's hard to know which came first sometimes too. It's like, okay, was the genetic predisposition there, or was that trauma that like triggered it into action there? It's hard to know. But I could see it from both sides. I do think in many cases there probably is some sort of genetic thing. But then, not to mention, many of them still are being abused too. They do have childhood trauma, and that certainly has an impact. It doesn't have no impact.
Like a lot of personality disorders, the behaviors are trauma responses in and of itself. That's why narcissists are so hypervigilant. They're so distrusting of others. It's like they're raised in an environment where they can't show emotions or express emotions, or they are punished for showing emotions. So they grow up thinking certain ways and believing certain things. And those are all trauma responses in and of itself. So, yeah.
Okay. Now, do you have hierarchical thinking?
Can you give me like an example of that?
So basically, it's when you'd go into some sort of room and you rank order the people in some sort of status hierarchy of, okay, this person's here, I'm here, and kind of ranking in whatever things are important to you.
Yes. It's not so much that I'll be like, oh, I'm better, but I will try to gauge the room around me. Yeah, I do.
Okay. Come in, I have a little bit of that. Like I said, I have some of the traits that can be sensitive to criticism sometimes, but not always. Other times would be what else? I mean, I guess like liking the attention can be a thing too for me as well. So I identify with them. I think something that really helped me was just going through those steps and getting some self-awareness before my frontal lobe and my brain fully developed.
Yeah.
I do think that probably plays a part too, where if you can get something before your brain's fully developed,
Yeah.
I think that can have a positive impact. And if people can notice that before that happens, and this is just purely speculation on my part, but it could probably have a good impact. If you can get it sooner, the sooner the better.
Yeah, that makes sense. So with your hierarchical thinking, like, would you judge a certain type of person, like certain characteristics more than others?
I guess it would be the things that I would find important, right? So, and there's many versions of it too. Like I'll catch myself, for example, if I'm on Instagram, I'll notice like the other people and how many followers they have. And I'm like, oh, this person's got more, this person gets less. And I can be competitive.
Yep.
So it's like, and I know it in myself. I'm like, oh, I'll get annoyed if I think people are like, they're going way past me. I'll get that jolt in me. And then I get ashamed for having that jolt a little bit because I'm like, oh, I know this is childish, or I know I shouldn't be thinking this way and feeling this way. But sometimes I still will. But I guess what helps me in that regard is, I guess the better I do, the less it hurts, I guess, the less it annoys me to see. But if I wasn't doing well with it, then it really bothered me when people were starting to do well. And again, that's just, you can consider that a narcissistic trait, or maybe emotional immaturity, or maybe competitiveness. I'm not sure.
I relate to that a lot, but I've also noticed that no matter how many followers you get, how many views, the number never stops. Like you'll always try to maintain the goalpost even farther. I had an old account where I had like 500,000 followers, and that still was not enough. And it just, it's never going to really end until you finally satiate that need within yourself to be like, okay, this is fine on its own. Like I am doing all right as I am.
Right. And that's the thing. It's like Bob Marley said, the numbers never end, so money is never going to get you everything you need.
Yep.
I do think there's a point, though, especially in America, that you got to get to a certain point to even be like comfortable. It seems like there's a certain benchmark where unless you get to that benchmark, life's going to be tough. It's like, it'd be nice to have enough to have your own place, be able to pay for your bills, and be able to do some things fun every once in a while. Like that's a good baseline, I think, to try to strive for. And if you don't have that, yeah, it's going to be tough. Then you can get jealous of the people who do have that when you don't.
No, I totally agree. Yeah.
So with that, it's you know, and I see people talk about it. I see some of the other self-aware narcissists, they'll talk about the comparing of the numbers there. And
Mhm.
honestly, I think a lot of people do that. They just don't admit it, is what I would think.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there's a piece of it there that people just don't feel comfortable sharing it. But I don't know. I believe in pain shared is pain lessened. And when you get, it's like you said, shadow work. What is that? To me, it's owning it.
Yeah.
Like you own these things and integrate. But I guess that's another good thing to talk about. How has shadow work been for you?
A lot of that has just been bringing up a lot of deep rooted beliefs, like how I feel not good enough, how I feel like I am not worthy enough, how someone will always choose someone else over me because I always feel like I'm the second option. So just a lot of things that I believed in my childhood that carried over into adulthood. Just unraveling that, trying to find the origin of it, the root. And you can, it's like a never ending tunnel. You can like go down it no matter like how far, you'll never reach it fully, but uncovering it still will help you get to some answers that you wouldn't have otherwise, and identify some behaviors. But it's been an interesting journey. It can bring up a lot of discomfort, but it helps.
And what did you learn? What did you learn about the origin?
Um, just different things about my childhood that I thought were normal that I realized were not normal, or things that, that I, yeah, desensitized to a lot of things that were actually not okay, and having to unlearn those things, or behaviors that I learned that I had to then decide, okay, do I want to be like this or do I want to break the cycle? And just, yeah.
Okay. And did you have narcissistic parents or parents that had something going on?
No, I did not have narcissistic parents. Both my parents struggled with different things. They both had mental health issues. But yeah, they had their own issues. They tried their best in the ways they knew how.
Okay. And I think that's a good attitude to have towards it too. I think I see people now, professionals even, they
Mhm.
really emphasize oh, your parents were so toxic and they don't deserve like grace, or they don't deserve to be like let off the hook.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like I understand, but at the same point, I don't think it's a helpful mindset to have towards it. It's like, so for example, like I had an upbringing that certainly wasn't perfect, but it could have been much, much worse. Right. And I think, and I see now as I get older, just how stressful life can be with
Mhm.
finances and trying to pay bills. So I look at it through that lens and I'm like, well, I probably would have been doing some of the same stuff. And my temper might have been a little off the rocker. And I'd be super stressed and annoyed too if I was in that same spot. And it's not to forgive it, it's not to say it's okay, but to me, it's helped me to understand. And it always reminds me of that Chester Bennington line from the song Numb. And I know you were just like me, with someone disappointed in you. It's
Mhm.
like, to me, that helps. It's like, okay, you're able to put yourself in that position. Okay, they probably went through something. Doesn't excuse it, doesn't make it okay,
Yeah.
but it helps you to understand, I think.
Yeah. For years when I was like a teenager, I would blame my parents. But as I grew older, I realized that I had to take sorry for my cat. I had to take responsibility for my own actions. And ultimately they were their own people trying their best. And did they always get it right? No. But they were human and they had some trauma of their own they never unlearned. And it happens.
Okay. And I think that's a helpful mindset to have. It's a helpful attitude to have towards the whole thing, because it's like Jim Carrey said. He said, I don't know if life happens for me or to me, but I try to act like like it happens for me so I
Yeah.
can best handle life stuff as it comes up. And I have found it's helpful to look at it that way. And the same thing with like whenever something happens, there's something to learn and an opportunity. And I try to remember that too, where, okay, say I get some antagonistic comment. It's like, well, maybe there's something to learn here.
Hmm.
Maybe there's something I can turn this into a positive.
Yeah.
Or another thing, and maybe this helps you too, probably, but like getting curious as opposed to annoyed. Now I fall into annoyed a lot. Like
Hmm.
I'll look at it like, but it's like, no, Jared, try to be a step above that and get curious or something, to get understanding, to not match their annoyed tone,
Hmm.
or if you can't not match their annoyed tone, don't even engage it, but try to be a step above it. And it's tough to do it in the moment when you get in those emotions, but that's where the big step back can come into play.
Yeah. No, I agree. Curiosity and just compassion is always a better approach than hostility or perpetuating hate with hate.
Okay. And what kind of cat do you have there, by the way?
He jumped off the bed, but he's just a brown tabby cat named Rue.
Okay. Now, and I think that's another thing people would say. Some people would say, "Oh no, if they don't like animals, it means something. It means this." Or if people do like animals, it means they definitely couldn't be this. And it's like, no, it has nothing to do with it. Like,
I get a lot of comments asking if narcissists hate animals, and I love animals. I actually feel a lot of emotional empathy for animals, whereas with the people, it's harder to feel empathy. I think it's, and a lot of people will say it's like, oh, it's because animals, it's more transactional because it's like an object. But for me, it's more so they can't emotionally hurt me, so I feel safer around them, and I'm able to actually emotionally feel more empathy because of that, because I know they're not a person that can emotionally hurt me.
I have that very same thing probably where they're just more comforting to be around, and people's like humans' energy can be exhausting to me, but an animal's energy not so much, because I used to work with a dog behaviorist, and she would always say that dogs will never give up on a person, but humans will give up on a dog. And it's kind of like that, where they're going to love you. Like,
Yeah.
unless you severely mistreat them,
Yeah.
like they're going to love you. And it's nice to have that where like I can like animals more than people a lot of times too. And some of it's because that animal is not going to criticize me. The animal is not going to give me any bad jolts. So in that way, it's comforting too.
Yeah, totally agree.
So I think, and I always remember Tony Soprano, like he was really into the ducks and he was into the horses in The Sopranos. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Oh, you got to watch it. So from a mental health perspective, I think you would even like it because Tony Soprano, the mobster, probably antisocial personality disorder, like they would say psychopath, but that's what a psychopath is. And so he had his wife, the enabler, who might have been also narcissistic herself a little bit. And then the daughter is the golden child and the son was the scapegoat. But it's a fascinating thing to look through like that perspective. And so I recommend checking it out.
Have you seen this show Succession?
No.
That's a really good character study into NPD. Like a lot of psychs have even came out and said how like accurate it is as far as narcissism.
Oh, okay. Are there any other good shows that you think really represent cluster B disorder as well?
A lot of them either heavily like demonize it and make it into like mustache twirling villains, or they romanticize it. So for me, I think Succession is by far the best portrayal of narcissism I've ever seen on TV, or just cluster B in general. Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to check that out then. And in your journey now, what are the things that you find that you struggle with now the most? What are the things that become the most difficult for you?
I still do a lot of self-destructive behaviors. A lot of things are internalized now, so my loved ones may not see it, but I deal with it internally. I still struggle to show like affection or like love to people sometimes. Like my loved ones will say that I don't seem like I care enough, or I'm aloof, or I'm withdrawn. That's because I tend to like go in a lot and like isolate and just be in my head. I don't like to talk about my feelings still sometimes. Like vulnerability still sometimes scares me. I struggle with envy or jealousy, competitiveness, but I'll be more harsh on myself about it. It's not like I'll outwardly like lash out at someone else. Be more just be myself up about it. But yeah, still struggle with empathy as far as like when someone else is going through something, I don't understand it. So I have to like logically rationalize it and think things through. And like, how could I logically help this person right now? Because I don't understand. And so just different things like that. I'm definitely not perfect. I still sometimes lie. I have the ability to manipulate if I still want to. Like I was a toxic person for years. I was not nice at all. I was emotionally abusive. And so yeah, I still, carry some of that with me, but I've unlearned a lot of it. But that was me.
And how would you be emotionally abusive? Was it more like belittling or gaslighting or?
Yeah, it was belittling, but it was more so me wanting to get the control. So I would use cruelty as a way to gain the upper hand. I would purposely do the silent treatment, like avoid them for hours and hours and hours on end, watching them like get my texts or watching me get their texts and like not answer and their panic like pile up, or purposely say cruel things in hopes that like it would hurt, try to like exploit their vulnerabilities, their flaws. Like I would do it almost as like experiments. Partly some of it was like BPD related, like, oh, if I push this person like so far, will they still like me or will they abandon me? And some of it was the NPD, like how much can I really like actually like see how far this person will go before they're just done with me. And I didn't want to show vulnerability. I didn't want to show love because I felt like that was weak. It made me feel gross, like a bad person. So I showed my love through, well, it wasn't even love. It was just cruelty and controlling. And it was not nice.
Well, and you can at least admit that now too. I think that's a huge thing.
Yeah.
Now, and I've heard you talk about this before, quiet borderline. Do you think
Yeah.
you have a little bit of that version?
Yeah, so there's like subtypes of borderline. They're not always used in a clinical setting, but so they call it quiet / discouraged, where it's like most of the BPD symptoms are internalized. And I would say that as I started healing my BPD, it became more quiet. Like at first it was the petulant, the loud, like outward type, and then it became more internalized. And I'd say that was the same more with my NPD as well. A lot of it's very internalized.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's harder to people to get diagnosed with that when it's the quiet because it's all, most of it's internal. And
Yeah.
people might be escaping in fantasy fiction books or something, but it doesn't appear like anything to the outside. It just looks like someone who's a little more quiet and reserved. But on the inside, it could be a free for all. It could be a wild roller coaster.
Yeah. And I was always very good at presenting well to like psychs or professionals. So my diagnosis, they slipped under for so many years because I would always present myself as like, oh, I'm fine, I'm good. And like, so they would like discharge me after only a few weeks, but I was ultimately like really doing poorly. So yeah. That's another thing. That's also why some cluster B disorders, they don't stay long in therapy or they don't get the correct diagnosis because they'll put on a mask because they have to do it because it's a trauma response, or they think that they don't want to be perceived badly because they don't want to be looked at as like a certain way. So they'll like just prop themselves up and make themselves have a different persona.
No, I agree with that. That's what Dr. Peter Salerno was saying too, about that very same thing. What would you say to the therapist as a way to try to disarm them? I'm not sure if that's the best word for it, but the best way to get them to be comfortable.
A lot of it wasn't even like consciously like I have to say this, but it was more so just like a script that I internally built in my head over time of like, this is a appropriate societal thing to say, of like trying to present myself as like more put together, more like I was always very logical and rational about certain things, and I was able to compartmentalize things. So like I would bring that out to the therapist and try to talk about like my behaviors that way. And so I came across as someone who was very like observant and self-aware and like put together, when in reality I was not. And I didn't even recognize at the time how bad I was because of how much I believed that persona I was putting out.
Okay. And what got you to open up a little bit and be more real with your therapist?
I think over time, the self-destructiveness, it just became too much. I couldn't hide it anymore. And whether it was like being forced into a facility or whatnot. And also I couldn't do it anymore. I had to find an outlet somehow to be able to get those emotions out. And I realized that to heal, honesty and transparency is the way to go. And I still sometimes struggle with being honest in therapy, not really as like a conscious lie, but more so that I don't always tell like how I'm truly doing because I don't even understand the gravity of like how bad I'm doing until after the fact. Like I tend to be so desensitized to my own like trauma responses. Like, so I'll have like an awful week of just like self-harming the whole week. And then I go into therapy and I'm like, oh, everything's good. Everything's fine. Like, don't worry, like whatever. And that wasn't it at all.
Right.
But I don't recognize it till after.
Now, if you were to actually share about it, do you think you would feel better? Like if you like that week of, and I get what you're saying though, too, because you probably
Yeah.
are uncomfortable sharing it. But if you were to share it, do you think it would be like, oh, thank goodness I got that off my chest? Or
So nowadays I do try to share a lot, but it's like when I get into the session, I almost forget. So like I have to write in my notes app, and I sometimes don't always remember, but like things that actually happened throughout the week so that I can go in and be like, oh wait, actually I did feel bad on this day. It wasn't just all good this week. And like I don't like actually be like jog my mind a little bit. Because whatever I'm currently feeling at the time, I feel as true. That's something I still struggle with. Like I think all personality disorders, they have that like black and white mentality still. So when I'm doing okay, it just feels like I was doing okay the entire time, and I forget what it was like when I was actually doing bad just a few hours ago. So Yeah.
Maybe you can relate to this statement too, but they say you never feel your sanity leaving, but you only feel its return.
Yep.
It's from a Stephen King book. And so to me, because when you go to NA and AA, they talk a lot about the disease of addiction.
Yeah.
And when you look at the disease of addiction, and I don't know if you believe in the disease of addiction or not, but if you look at it, the way they talk about it seems to me to be a lot like how people would talk about narcissism too. So I think that's part of the reason I can speak about it as well as I do. So like I can relate to it in me in some cases, but then I also see it through that lens too. And it adds up where it's like just replace drug with whatever other version of supply that someone has.
Yep.
And what are your versions now? Do you have versions of self-esteem juice, as Jacob would say?
I would say that my eating disorder behaviors are still primarily my supply. It has been my supply for years, where it's like I use my self-destructive coping mechanisms to validate my own pain. It's like a way of trying to feel out of control by controlling it. So my whole like deal is trying to gain control of things. And even though the binge eating is like an out of control behavior, it's still something I'm purposely doing and I'm monitoring it. And it's like I'm able to have control of whether I do it or not. And so that's my supply, like a way to do it in secret or a way to do it like without people knowing or ways around it. And it's not healthy. And it's something I am working on in therapy, but that's still one of the behaviors that I tend to skirt around in therapy because I don't want to actually tackle it yet because it still feels so comforting to me. But yeah.
I can relate to that. I remember years ago when I was like 28 or 29, I got into the point of the spiritual program where I knew the next step was to like, I had to give up dating and give up women, but I wasn't ready to do it. I knew that was like the next step. And the way I was thinking about it, I had like the borderline version of looking for the ideal love. I wanted someone to reflect back to me so I could feel good enough. The only difference between me and the narcissistic person was it was just one person that I had wanted. It was like I just wanted one person to be like the Disney movie, you make it all better. And I knew this was the point. I had stopped drugs, I had stopped drinking. I mean, alcohol is a drug too, but gambling, cigarettes, caffeine, I got rid of it all.
Yeah.
And I got to that point and I said, no, I'm not willing. And then lo and behold, I did stop going after that too. Like it's just something that I didn't want to address. And so I just didn't. And then by coincidence, I addressed it later, but only because it wasn't something that was as pressing anymore. It was like my ideas and the things I value changed. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm looking for this woman now. It's like, no, I just got more into other things. So by accident, I did it. But it's like I cheated the process, though. I didn't do it when it was really something that I wanted. I did it when it wasn't something I wanted anymore as much. It was, I'm not sure if I'm making sense with that. But
no, it makes sense. Yeah.
So, and that's, it helped. But we get to those points sometimes where it's like, okay, we know we got to work with something, but are we ready to face it?
Yeah.
Are we ready to try to push through? What would you say? I was thinking this too as you were talking. What are the uncomfortable emotions that you struggle feeling now? Because I know which ones they are for me, but
I struggle to show anger or rage. A lot of that morphs into like depression or anxiety. I have a hard time like exerting boundaries. I will actually be a pushover when I say that, and people get confused because they associate narcissism with like walking all over everyone, whereas I let people do that to me, but it's a learned response. The emotions I struggle to feel, I guess, would be relaxation, feeling content, feeling joy, any positive emotions, I guess. It's hard to sit with that and feel like relaxed because I'm always hypervigilant. I'm always like my nervous system is activated, constantly looking for the next like crisis or bad situation to be anxious over. My primary emotions are anxiety and depression. I forget if I already said that, but yeah. So I'm never really comfortable with the feeling of being comfortable.
What do you think it does for you not feeling that?
I guess it's a good question. That's probably something I should ask my therapist. I guess it's just a way to, it's all perception really, because like I'm just sitting in a room right now and I'm not doing anything yet. My nervous system is still activated, whereas it doesn't have to be. And it's trying to unlearn how to disentangle those things and try to sit with yourself and feel content with what you have and practice gratitude and mindfulness. And learning that being okay is being okay.
I can totally relate to that too, actually, where being still and doing nothing and being okay with just doing nothing, to me, that has become the hardest thing for me.
Yeah.
And this is where I get kind of twisted up sometimes with it, because on one hand, I can be like a workaholic, and part of the shadow thing would be to me, well, just own it. You're that way. Own it. But at the same time, when you own it, you might be stuffing something else that maybe is trying to get out as well. So I don't know if you know people like Alex Hermosi. They're part of what I would consider capitalist porn. So it's like self-help stuff. He's like, go, 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 be good in business.
Yeah.
And it's what it is, right? And those guys, for them, working hard isn't hard anymore. Like, they would probably feel much more uncomfortable if they weren't working hard. Like, if they weren't doing something and on the go, 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 that's what would make them uncomfortable. And I was reading a book by Dr. Orion Taraban the other day. It's called The Value of Others. And he said something that really stood out to me. He said, courage is feeling the fear and doing it anyway. Madness is not feeling the fear at all.
Yeah.
And so I think what we see and we might think is courage in a lot of people is often just madness. They're not even feeling it. So the people who are go, go, go in business, they're not feeling the discomfort of that. It would be more uncomfortable for them to not do that.
Yeah.
So we're just seeing their madness in action.
Yeah, they're outrunning their emotions that way.
Yeah.
It's duality and the nuance of trying to find a way to be productive while also being able to find the quiet moments and the still moments, and just check in with yourself and learn who you are and learn what your values are and your beliefs are without feeling like you need to be on autopilot doing this thing all the time. And a lot of people think that they need to like work and do all these like productive things in order to be a functioning member of society, but there's also the flip side of trying to just be a person, just live in your body, exist, and acknowledge what you're feeling at the time.
All right, so and here's two more. These are two I struggle with. They're probably like spectrum or borderline type things, maybe narcissistic too. But gratitude, I can struggle with actually feeling it. I can mouth the words and I know what to say.
Yeah.
But the feeling of it can be very uncomfortable to me. Like, and having to be, it's honestly why one of my hells is opening like gifts on a birthday and like having people expect your reaction to try to like muster up something in the moment, where to me, I think about it. And so it makes it harder that I'm thinking about it. But that's a very uncomfortable thing for me to think about.
That's interesting you say that. I feel the same way, but for me, it's more so that I feel like I have to pay for everyone. I don't want to receive anything like monetary. Like, I feel like guilty. I shouldn't even say it's a love language, but it's like I have this grandiose belief that I need to pay for everyone, that I need to monetarily provide, and that's how I show my love. Like, when someone has having a problem, I'll be like, okay, how much do you need? And I'm not rich by any means. I'm on disability, but I will always try to approach people's problems with money. And a lot of people get upset with that, and they just want to vent sometimes. And it's like, I have to learn, and I'm still learning how to not just like throw money at them or try to like fix it with like money, but rather just let them vent, let them talk about their problems without trying to offer them a way out of it financially.
Okay. So you want to like fix it for them.
Yeah. And then I feel uncomfortable if they like try to give me something back, like money wise. Like, it just feels like icky, and I don't really know where that comes from. But yeah, as far as feeling gratitude, I agree with feeling like saying the words is easy, and I've kept gratitude journals in the past, but it's hard to feel that emotion. Practicing it consistently does help, or at least it's helped me when I used to do it for like 30 days at a time, but it's not easy.
Yeah, it's just something uncomfortable about it. And I know when I was reading Dr. Salerno's book, he had mentioned that a lot of narcissistic people really struggle with the feeling of gratitude. And I was like, well, I can relate to that a little bit. And I think for you and the money thing, I think to me, a part of that would probably be just like, it has an element of control for you. Where like, okay, here I am, I'm trying to do something for you. And it probably makes you feel good, I would think, to be the person that can do that?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I think it's more so just like shame comes out of it. Like I know some people with NPD that feel like they have to be the provider and they get defensive over it, whereas mine is not more defensiveness or like, oh, I can do everything myself and I'm independent, but it's more so just like, oh no, please don't spend money on me, I'm not deserving. Maybe that's some of the BPD like residual remains of that seeping in. Yeah.
Okay. And the other thing, and I mentioned this with HG Tutor too when I spoke to him, but sometimes seeing other people cry, and I'll watch them online crying, to me, that can annoy me sometimes. I'll see it, it'll make me feel uncomfortable and annoyed. And I'm just like, I get a shudder.
Yeah.
I don't know if you get that too, but there's just something about it that kind of I just don't like.
Well, let me ask you a question. Are you able to cry? Like, or
I
feel
can,
comfortable crying?
yeah, I can cry. And I think what happens is, so there's a whole space online now of people like, oh, be vulnerable, be this, be that, or a real man cries, a real man doesn't cry, blah, blah, blah. To me, even talking about what a real man does or doesn't do, to me, it's all cringe. It's like,
Yeah.
if you cry, you cry.
Yeah.
Like, I see this guy, what the heck's his name? The divorce lawyer, James Sexton. I mean, he's someone who cries, and it's just like not a thing. Like, he owns his emotions, and he's also masculine at the same time. And if he cries, he cries. And to me, that's how I try to be. It's been a while probably since I've cried in front of somebody else. I'd be more like comfortable crying by myself more than likely. But yeah, it's been a while. That's probably been a while.
Yeah, so for me, I cry over like TV shows or like dumb stuff like that, but when crying about like actual like things in my life, it's hard for me to do it in front of someone else. And I don't know if that's why you also feel discomfort, like if you cry in front of someone else, and that's why you don't like when other people cry because like you're witnessing someone else's emotions. I don't know. But yeah, when someone else cries in front of me, it's like I don't know what to do, and I do kind of get annoyed, and it's like, all right, just stop crying now. But I don't want to like hurt their feelings, so I have to like consciously be like, no, don't do that. We're gonna comfort them and console them. But if it drags on, like I just start in my head just being like, oh my god, just shut up. But I think that's because I outrun my emotions all the time, and it's like if I do start crying, I'll just shove it down immediately. Like it's like it only for a few seconds, and I'm done. So it's me outrunning my own emotions, so I can't really accept other people's like emotions.
Yeah. I mean, like sometimes I'll do coaching sessions with people and I'll hear people cry. And that doesn't bother me as much. Like I can be okay. In person, though, I think would be even worse. Like there was something that would be more uncomfortable with that. And I probably feel even more uncomfortable if it was me crying, unless it was somebody I was like super comfortable with. But like I'd probably feel maybe ashamed. I'm not sure what I would feel.
Yeah.
But I think something would be uncomfortable about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and those are the things I notice in me that I know I can relate to amongst some of like the people that would be full-blown narcissists sometimes not.
Yeah.
But the other thing, being controlled, that's another big one for me that I'm not in that at all, or I hate anything that resembles being controlled, can be pretty obnoxious. And so, for example, people telling me things to do, like, oh, you need to do this and do this for me, do that for me. That I always get a negative jolt from. And I really have to be careful to not just go with that emotion and run with the jolt, as opposed to taking a step back and trying to do something different.
Yeah. My partner and I are both like that. He tends to outwardly display his reaction to it, whereas I more just inwardly and just like, but I'll do it anyways. Or I mean, if it's something that I feel like I should be doing. But yeah, if someone's like, oh, go do this or like go do that for me, it's like no, I don't want to now. I don't know. But
I'm that way too. It was just like, and I think that's part of the control dynamic though too, where it's like if it's my idea, I like it. So like I was always told as a kid, you need to go volunteer. You need to go help out. You need to go help out your grandmom. You need to help out this person. And when I'm told to do it, I hate it.
Yeah.
But if I were to come up with the idea myself and did it on my own, now all of a sudden it's a completely different experience. And I'm like, oh, look at this. I'm helping out the people. But when I'm told to do it, it just ruins it. It just ruins it and I get annoyed. But so whatever that would be considered, I guess that's just a control piece, I guess.
Yeah.
But I really don't like that.
Yeah.
And
Really.
and the other thing was, oh, this is like a borderline thing for me too. So part of being an avoidant, I think sometimes is sometimes when people make your skin crawl. Like there's sometimes when I'm in a certain mood where just being around people would make my skin crawl. And I don't know if that's an introverted thing or an
Mhm.
avoidant thing or an autistic thing or a
Yeah.
borderline thing. But certain times I can be in a mood where I just need to not be around people and their very presence is just no good. So like I gotta recharge on my own. And that might just be an introvert thing. But
Yeah, that makes sense. Sorry, I cut you off. I have a bad habit of doing that. Were you done or?
no, that was good. So do you have that too? Do you have
Yeah,
some of that like
it's
skin crawling feeling?
I wouldn't really call it skin crawling for me. It feels more like, sorry if you can hear my roommate coughing. It's more so like this like jittery like jumpiness inside where it's
Okay.
like it feels like I need to escape and it's like so like I'll go in another room or yeah, if I can. Or otherwise I'll just sit with the discomfort, but it's like very jittery.
Okay, I can relate to that. And is like the things like caffeine and whatever, do they make that worse?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how it'd be for me. And because I think like before I started taking all my supplements, I was so sensitive to everything
Hmm.
where just like sugar can put me into like a little hypomanic episode.
Hmm.
And then the same with caffeine. And it was just a lot. It was a
Yeah.
lot to deal with that amount of sensitivity. So now like I've kind of evened it out a little bit so I don't get those kind of jolts as much
Mhm.
as I used to and I'm more emotionally regulated now
Yeah.
and it helps to be more productive
Hmm.
because it's not like we're in a hunting and gathering culture where we can just be out in the world and do what we got to do just to survive. But
Yeah.
in the modern world, it's like nah, that doesn't fly. It's like no, you got to go do this or you got to do that or you got to get something to
Yeah.
be able just to survive.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it can be a lot for people, though. It can be a lot.
Yeah, we're all just trying our best in different ways, trying to navigate it. No one knows what's going on, but we're all just, doing our thing.
Some people try to pretend they know what's going on.
Yeah, that's true. But I feel like everyone does to an extent. We all have little masks. Sometimes it's not as like pathological as a disorder, but I feel like everyone has some sort of facade. I mean, they're not going to display their full like heart on their sleeve to everyone.
Sure. Now, do you wear a mask still a lot, or do you try to like drop the mask for your content?
I've asked like it's hard for me to even really realize that I have a mask or whatever. My partner says I do, that I act different in my videos, that I act more assured and confident, whereas in person I'm more like shrunken in on myself and more insecure and more openly like depressive. So I think I do probably have like a persona that I don't even really realize that I do. But yeah, it's easier for my loved ones to give me feedback about that because I don't even really realize it.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think a friend of mine, she had a term where she said people that charge their mask. There are some people
Yeah.
that they have it and they have to like maybe be alone or something and they charge up that mask and then they can go out into the world, especially the covert kinds, right? The covert kinds that like behind closed doors is where the chaos will be. But then when they're out in public, it can be, oh, they're just the nice, helpful person that's so kind and sweet and is always there to help somebody. So, and then I hear this in my clients sometimes too, where they talk about it'll be their husbands or boyfriends, right? And
Mhm.
so there'll be the person at work that's one person, oh, great at his job, doing great. But then the second they leave that office, it's a different ball game. And he's like, I don't want you to have any friends home when I'm there. They need to leave. I'm not going to come in the door unless they're gone. And it's like the whole thing slips. And I was like, oh, I see. And I get it to an extent because if I had that skin crawling feeling, I wouldn't want to be around people either. So I
Yeah.
don't know if I would convey it though in the same way that guy was. So
Mhm.
in a way, I get the feeling, but a lot of it's just how you communicate it, right? You can have a feeling, but how do you communicate that feeling? That makes or breaks it. It's like, is that an emotionally mature thing or an emotionally immature thing? I think it's just how you communicate the feeling is what determines it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I guess for me, my mask is rather flimsy. Like my partner has ASPD and he's able to chameleon and morph into so many different people depending on like what situation he's in, and he'll adopt different accents and mannerisms, and it's not in a malicious way, but it's more so that it's like a learned like survival instinct. So if I already brought this up in the live earlier, just remind me. But I don't think I did.
You didn't.
He sells like crocheted items that he makes, and like he'll put on a Bostonian accent sometimes because he knows that draws people in. He's not from Boston. And like he'll have like different like ways of like going about things, because, and he'll even just like test human behavior just to see the reactions. So he's more calculated than like I ever was. But that's also a part of ASPD, just being more calculated and manipulative, like consciously. So yeah, he has a lot of masks, whereas for me, it's like just my outward mask, which is more like more confident, I guess, or more looking like self-assured, and then my actual self, whereas he has like a whole bunch. Not saying that's a good or bad thing. It's just something I've observed.
It just is.
Yeah,
it is. I mean, and part of that can be just a survival mechanism or an adaptation.
Yeah, that's what it ultimately is. Because at first, when I started hearing the Bostonian accent or like the other types of accents, it was like, oh, who are you right now? But then I had to realize like he's not doing it maliciously. It just is kind of just weird to like hear a person that I see every day just suddenly morph into someone else. Like his whole face changes and everything. And like I could never do that. So like he can do it so easily and just quickly and out of it. But so it's a survival thing based off.
I think you see that amongst politicians sometimes, like depending on where they go into the country.
Yeah,
they do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I would guess there's probably a fair chunk of politicians who have ASPD.
Yeah, my partner works in the mental health field. He said that politics, law, mental health, and sales, ASPD and MPD are the main.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know what? And no one talks about histrionic personality disorder. It's the forgotten personality disorder.
Yeah, it is. And a lot of people say that's because they don't like the way that the name originated from hysteria. I don't even know like really anyone who's diagnosed with HPD. I don't really know of any HPD creators, like not saying the disorder is not there, but it's just it's not talked about a lot. Even ASPD, there's not really many ASPD creators that are like open about it. I know a few, but there's not many. Like people have heard the word sociopath or psychopath, but they don't know what ASPD is. Like if you say that to them,
I mean, they don't even know, right? They don't realize that. I mean, psychopath and sociopath are not even technical terms. It's really just a version of ASPD.
Yeah, so my partner makes content, but in his videos, instead of saying like, oh, ASPD person, whatever person with ASPD talks about this, he'll say a sociopath talks about blah, blah, blah. That gets people's attention and gets them to look.
Yeah, and that's sometimes you got to play the game a little bit, you know?
Just because otherwise people will not know. They'll be like, what's ASPD? And they'll scroll. But they know what a sociopath is, or they've heard what the word is, so then that will get their attention.
And I guess, I mean, what is officially the distinction between sociopath and psychopath? Do you know?
With psychopath, it's more of like cold, calculating, vindictiveness. It's also way more of control over their impulses. So sociopaths are more impulsive. They're more like rageful, whereas psychopaths, they can have a long con that's like premeditated and go on for like years. And they can be very, very malicious, and they have basically no guilt or remorse. Sociopaths can feel some, depending on like it's situational.
Okay, so I didn't know that.
Yeah, so my partner does not feel guilt or remorse often, but there are times where he does, and like it's a revelation for him, and we talk about it. But and also psychopaths don't really form close attachments at all. Sociopaths can. So my partner, it takes a very, very long time for him to form an attachment, but once he does, he's very loyal to his inner circle.
Okay, I think the gimmicky thing I used to hear people say was, "Oh, a psychopath is born and a sociopath is made," or something like that. That's what they always used to say. And I don't think it's true, but that's just what people would say.
Yeah. I have read some studies saying that psychopathy, there's some like differences in the formation of the brain, but ultimately, again, it's an understudied disorder. So
right. And that's the thing about all the cluster B disorders. It's like, well, whether they're genetic or whether they're childhood trauma, it's what's going to change the solutions. That would, to the extent that they change the solutions, is how much they would matter. It's like, okay, if it was truly genetic, would that change how you work on it? I mean, probably not. I mean, the people who have it now, it's like whether it was from genetics or childhood trauma, you're still probably going to do the same things. The only distinction would be I guess the genetic part, like treatment for trauma, wouldn't have as much of an impact if it's more genetic. So I take that back, that part. So,
Yeah.
and that is a thing. When I was reading Dr. Salerno's book, he did kind of go back and forth between trauma and what that can look like versus like behaviors of a narcissist or whatever else.
Mhm.
And I guess it's another good thing. Do you pick up, is there such a thing as like antisocial fleas? Like they talk about narcissistic fleas, but is there like antisocial or sociopathic fleas that can happen?
Um, I have not picked up that for him. I think I kind of let him be the main voice or whatever. I just kind of just go with the flow. He tends to be a little bit more controlling than I am, not in like a abusive or toxic way, but he just has a very dominating personality. So I just kind of whatever. Yeah, so I don't really know if there's like fleas would be the right word. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I'll have to think about that.
I mean, I just came up with that on the spot. I've
Yeah.
never thought about it, but it's like people say narcissistic fleas, and maybe it's from CPTSD, maybe it's just from being around somebody and you become like the people you surround yourself with. Could be either.
I feel like it probably would be a thing because I've heard people talk about like how they dated someone with BPD and they picked up some traits of theirs. So like I think if you're around someone long enough and you associate with them, you're eventually going to pick up on some of their patterns or behaviors. You can just unlearn them if you don't have the pathological disorder.
Right. Absolutely. And I think, and overall, for what you are doing, I think like it is the most helpful for the people who may be borderline and for the people who may have the diagnosis of narcissism or could at least like start to think, okay, maybe I do. Like maybe I do. And for those people, it is absolutely going to be the most beneficial, is what I would say. But would you agree with that?
Yeah, like I know I said at the beginning that I get a lot of like hate comments about the NPD videos, but I have also gotten a lot of DMs of people saying like I questioned if I had NPD and I went to a therapist and I got a diagnosis because of your videos. So like I have helped some people in that regard, or like just even people say like, oh, I can acknowledge my narcissistic traits now. So I think it is beneficial in that respect. I don't make my content like pro narcissist or like anti narcissist. I try to just talk about my lived experience because ultimately like I don't want to go on either side of the coin. I think there's too much like I don't know. I don't
Well,
like that.
and this is where I think the courage comes into play, because it does take courage for you to do what you do and to get like a little vulnerable, for lack of a better word.
Mhm.
And, I try to share those kinds of things too, because like when I used to go to NA, for example, like the more deep stuff I would share, the more it would help other people. And I think, and that is one of the antidotes to all of this stuff, is if you can help people, it's really one of the best ways to get outside of yourself. And
Mhm.
not that that's why you do it, but it's like Ralph Waldo Emerson said, you can't help anybody else without also helping yourself. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just like a non-selfish thing to try. And when the more you open up and like keep it real about yourself, that will help the most amount of people without a doubt.
Yeah. I mean, making content, I don't know if it's like that for you, but it's like a sense of community. It's also like a therapeutic outlet for accountability because it makes you
Sure.
reflect and introspect and talk about things you wouldn't have probably talked about otherwise. So, there's definitely a lot of layers to it.
I mean, it can be like a video diary for me, because for me, if it's a short video, I can stay on topic and I can be like concise, like
Mhm.
60 seconds, 90 seconds, up to like 5 or 10 minutes. But
Yeah.
if I start talking longer than 5 to 10 minutes, I'm going to start talking about what's on my heart and mind.
Mhm.
And before I know it, I'll just be talking about things. I'll talk about things that happened years ago, or things I'm struggling with, or things that are just on my mind.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure if it's that way for you. Like if you do longer lives, and like the longer you're live, the more of the like the deeper self comes out.
Yeah. Do you get like more negative comments when you start talking about the vulnerable things?
No, actually. No, I think people relate to it. Well, I get the negative comments when people will say I sound too sure about myself, perhaps, or they'll say, especially if it's guys with accountability, because I think there are some people that when I talk about narcissism, they assume I'm talking about guys, some of them, right?
Mhm.
And so guys will think I'm talking about them when I
Yeah.
mention a trait that they probably do, and then they go at me. And so I've learned to try not to engage with them for the most part, but they still do that. Like they certainly do that. Now I get the hate for that, or I got hate for mentioning that Sam Vaknin's not a credentialed professional. They didn't like me that I said that. And I said, don't get it twisted. I don't think he's wrong about everything he says. Like I learn a lot from him. And I think just because he's not a licensed professional doesn't mean he's discredited. It's like, I'm not a licensed professional either. It's like, it means nothing to me. It's like, but I think he's got a group of people that are like really his fans no matter what. It's like almost cult-like in a way. And I was like, like he'll have you believe in all sorts of things that who knows, you know, it could be weird. It could be weird, which reminds me about you. So how do you prevent, you think, like the narcissistic traits from coming out for you? Because I've said this before about just narcissism in general. It's about power, control, image, narcissistic supply, and avoiding accountability. Do you have like a checklist or like a way to try to prevent yourself from kind of, I don't know, falling into some of those things?
I mean, I still exhibit some of those behaviors on a daily basis, and a lot of it's still instinctive, and I'll try to catch myself. I'm definitely not healed by any means, but I think that a lot of the malicious, vindictive behaviors, they've diminished and they've basically been dormant. But yeah, I still have a lot of what you just said. It's just I'll rein it in, or it's like I'll instantly flip it. So then it's like, no, we don't do that anymore. And then I'll try to like go to a different train of thought. But yeah, I still struggle with that a lot because it's instinctive, it's innate, it's what I learned, it's what I operated with for so long, and it's trying to retrain my brain essentially.
Okay. And I appreciate you being honest about that too. I think I know that takes courage to do. And do you think, because I know with a lot of narcissistic people, they're not going to be able to feel that feeling of empathy, but they can learn cognitive empathy. And some narcissists will have a little more empathy than others, right? It's not like they have none.
Yeah.
Like it can just be low or impaired, as they'll call it, right?
Yeah.
And I think,
yeah. For me, I think I strengthened my empathy, or at least my levels of compassion and sympathy, because a few years ago, I was very hostile and defensive, and I would start fights whenever I could. Now, I am not like that at all. I really try to keep the peace, and I try to be the one to actually like simmer things down, or I just listen and try to get people's perspectives. And that was totally not me a few years ago. So I still make things about me sometimes, a lot of the times. But also I try to be more of a listener now too. I try not to just make it all about me, but I try to also take their perspective into account.
yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And I think, like I said, the more you share about that kind of stuff, I think the more it absolutely helps a lot of people too, for that matter. And do you see a lot of the black and white stuff in your comments too, where people like, they really struggle to see that more than one thing can be true at the same time?
Yeah, I get a lot of people projecting whatever they experienced onto me and saying that all people do this, all narcissists do that. And I will try to like nicely talk about how my experience is different because of these reasons. And they still double down and be like, no, because I heard from this source or Dr. Romney or, you know, whoever that like, whatever, all narcissists do this. And at that point, it's like people believe what they want to believe. I can't do anything about it. And, some people are open-minded, some people can change their thought patterns about it, and some people are really like gung-ho about certain beliefs about narcissism.
Right.
It's how it is.
And I think the thing for people to remember is behaviors can always be different, because the only thing that would be consistent with a diagnosed narcissist are those core traits. Like those traits will be consistent, but that does not mean the behaviors and the words will be consistent. It might be in some cases, but not always.
Yeah, I get a lot of people assuming that it's I operate in like the malignant, vindictive, malicious, like abusive, like infidelity, all of the ones that you associate with like a malignant narcissist, they pile that onto me, where it's like it's not all the same. It's like we have the same diagnostic criteria, but they manifest in so many different presentations.
Right. And what did it do for you before, when you were more antagonistic or you liked maybe being in debate mode? What did that do for you?
I think it gave me like this like sense of dopamine, this like
Uh,
uh yeah, because I just also wasn't able to even regulate myself. So like I was regulating myself through like hostility with other people. It was a way to like gain some emotional regulation in a unhealthy way. Also perhaps some external validation. I don't know. I used to be very, very argumentative, and it almost just would make me feel calmer. It's like I would purposely start a fight and then I'd feel calm after. And it just was not a healthy way of operating, but yeah.
Right. Now, you're not the first person to tell me that, because this is the cool thing about when you open up to people and you're honest and you don't judge people when they say what they say. Like, people will start telling you the truth. They'll start like opening up to you a little bit. And people would tell me, "Oh yeah, I pick fights to calm myself. I pick fights to basically regulate like their sense of their mood." And that's what does it, though. So them causing a fuss and them like tormenting someone else a little bit, that regulates them. And I think it's important to know that just on the outside. You can, like, it's not good, of course, but just to know that, I think, is very helpful.
Yeah.
And so to know that they would do that is, I mean, and there are people out there who do that. Like, and you see it, I think you see it online all the time. Like, there's a lot of people that they've had a bad day at work. They're like, let me go use that creator as a punching bag and just say whatever I want to say and try to be antagonistic. So I've tried to learn to just not engage, because they can't get under your skin if you don't engage, right? Like, they can say the one thing, and that one thing may or may not have an impact, but if you engage it and try to like combat what they say, then you risk getting sucked in a little bit and then getting hurt more. So after doing that wrong enough times, I was like, okay, if I see an initial comment that's antagonistic, or it's like they're doing some zingers in there or some subtle jabs, it's like, no, I won't even engage it. Like, if I sense that tone or those jabs, there's just no use. Now, if someone has like a real disagreement and they're being good faith about it, that's a different story. Like, I'll talk to a good faith disagreement. But what I've also noticed is it's so rare. It's so rare to have people to have good faith disagreements. A lot of them just go straight to the antagonism.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Well, one more thing I wanted to ask you. Any other new ink therapy sessions you got coming up?
Yeah, I had to finish his arm. It's not done yet, but in a few weeks it will be, just all the way up. But yeah.
What is there now?
On my arm, it's just like a cover up of some old tattoos that I had, but it eventually will be like all black pretty much all the way up.
So you got your elbow? You got your elbow now?
Not yet. It's still there, but eventually it won't be.
Oh man. So when I did my elbow here, the whole thing balloons up like a softball, and I couldn't even like get my arm straight for like a day or two. But that was painful. That was probably one of the most painful spots. Are you somebody that likes the tattoo pain?
Yeah. To me, like, I have a high pain tolerance. Tattoos don't bother me. Piercings do. Like that. Like those kill.
I had a feeling you would say you'd like the tattoo pain.
Yeah.
Me, I hate it. I can deal with it for a little bit, but the longer it goes, the more I hate it.
Yeah, I had my chest done and this done a few days ago. It was like a 6-hour session. 2 artists were working on me at once, and it was fine.
Really?
Yeah.
So I wonder if your body like gets confused of where to like feel the pain.
It was like almost canceling each other out at times, and then it was like amplifying it. It was a weird experience, but yeah.
And how do you feel about these people that like get put under now for these tattoos? Have you seen that?
I haven't, no.
Oh, there's people that are cheating. So they get like, they go under anesthesia or something like that. And then people
use like numbing cream, really, anesthesia. But
yeah, they're going under. They're going under like they're going in for surgery. And then they wake up tattooed. So I'm like, you're cheating. Part of the process is the pain.
Exactly. That's my line of thought. Like, I don't use numbing cream because it's like, no, I got to feel it.
Yeah. And the tattoo artist, when you're with someone like that, and that kind of intimate setting for hours, it's like, they call it ink therapy for a reason. I think as the pain builds up, you become more vulnerable and you start like sharing. It's like whatever masks or whatever was on your brain, it melts away because like that exterior just gets torn down. And so you have some deep talks with the tattooer.
Yeah.
Have you thought about doing that?
Tattooing? No. just gonna get inked, but no, I'm not a good enough drawer.
Okay, it's not for every. I'm terrible at drawing myself. And I guess we'll close on this question here. What are your goals moving forward, or what would you like your life to look like in the next 5 to 10 years or so?
So I always have a very basic answer for whenever anyone asks me this, but it's to find a general sense of safety, whatever that looks like. I don't know. Just for me to find a place where I'm able to actually feel content. I don't know where that'll be, what state, if I'm even in the state still, but yeah, just trying to find safety and just happiness, little moments of joy that I can appreciate more.
And you think you're the closest to that now that you've ever been?
Yes and no. Every day is different, but I'm just trying my best, chipping away at it, and hopefully one day I'll get there.
Yeah, sounds good. So, is there anything else you wanted to mention here before we shut this thing down?
Yeah. So if anyone is in a relationship with someone who, whether they have diagnosed NPD or if you think they're a narcissist or if you don't know if they're a narcissist, and if they're treating you badly, I do not recommend waiting around in hopes that they'll stay, hopes that they'll change. Because what they'll do ultimately, you don't know if they will. Accountability is hard, introspection is hard, and abusive relationships, they can really tear you down and really just hurt you. And a lot of people ask me like, oh, should I wait for this person? Will they eventually like change their mind? Will they eventually like get better? And it's like, they have to be the one to change. You cannot change them. You cannot fix them. You cannot love them enough into them being like, hey, I actually do these things. I need to get help. So just set boundaries, be safe, be careful, and just think about what you do and don't deserve.
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing to say, because it's like you said, if someone's not going to change, if someone's not going to admit to something and they're not putting in the footwork, it's not going to change.
Yeah.
So if they're mistreating you and they're not putting in any effort to change, I mean, there's nothing else to do. And I think that's important. It's important. It's the only danger I could see of the self-aware narcissist community is people listen to it and would say, oh, this person's a narcissist, so I'm going to try to give him the benefit of the doubt or her the benefit of the doubt. But then they put themselves in bad situations. To me, that's the only thing I could see that could go wrong. Like, other than that, I think it's great what you do. And I'm glad that you mentioned what you did there. But where can people find you?
On Instagram, Kylee Rackam. Pretty much everywhere it's Kylee Rackam. And on Instagram, it's Kylee Rackam with an underscore at the end. So that's where you can find me.
All righty. Well, I appreciate you coming on here, Kylee, and I appreciated the conversation.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
All right, bye.